Thank you so much, Steve. Well, hello, everyone. I am truly excited to be here with you all today. Happy to see so many folks joining us for the kickoff of an important conversation. We'll be doing a lunch and learn. We'll be meeting the exact same time each day of this week through Friday. Today's first session is focused on foundational concepts. There's a couple of things we want to do to get started. First, I'd ask that everyone participate in the Mentimeter. And there's two ways you can do this. You can either pull out your phone and just simply show the QR code to your phone camera, and it's going to drop you into the Mentimeter presentation. Or if you prefer to use your laptop, just open up another browser, minty.com. It's going to ask you for the code. You'll insert that code there. Perfect. I'm seeing some people already do a thumbs up that have gotten it. Don't worry if you don't get this right now, I will show it again. But this is a way to allow a bit more interaction in our webinar together in our time together. Okay, so I'll give you another opportunity to connect with that. So I have been working in the field of prevention for a little while now, and the topics around structural inequities, disparities, health equity is something that has impacted my life directly. I wanted, when Steve and I started talking about doing this series together, we really went back and forth around whether or not to kick off the series today for a couple reasons. Many of you may or may not know that today is Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day. And it was just only recognized as a federal holiday in 2021. And we wondered, should we host an event on a holiday? And after much thought and consideration, we said yes, because we thought today would also be an opportunity to really highlight this particular holiday. And we felt that it was in alignment with the topic of the series. So as a result of that, I'm so honored today to have a special presentation for you all in honor of Juneteenth. I have two special guests here who are going to help me do this moment of time. That's all it really is when you think about it, as a moment in time, to help us all understand the significance and importance of Juneteenth as a holiday. So there are three things that are going to happen. The first, I have a short video that we will share, and had an artist by the name of Daisy Mays, who I think I saw her in the list of attendees who may actually be logged in, but she submitted a piece that I'll share. And then another attendee on the phone today is Donna Marie, who will also speak to you all into the audience. Okay, so let's just get started here first with a really short, well done video from TED Talk that summarizes exactly what Juneteenth is.
One day, while hiding in the kitchen, Charlotte Brooks overheard a life-changing secret. At the age of 17, she'd been separated from her family and taken to William Nealon's Texas plantation. There, she was made to do housework at the violent whims of her enslavers. On that fateful day, she learned that slavery had recently been abolished, but Nealon conspired to keep this a secret from those he enslaved. Hearing this, Brooks stepped out of her hiding spot, proclaimed her freedom, spread the news throughout the plantation, and ran. That night, she returned for her daughter, Tempe, and before Nealon's spiteful bullets could find them, they were gone for good. For more than 2 centuries, slavery defined what would become the United States, from its past as the 13 British colonies to its growth as an independent country. Slavery fueled its cotton industry and made it a leading economic power. 10 of the first 12 presidents enslaved people. And when U.S. chattel slavery finally ended, it was a long and uneven process. Enslaved people resisted from the beginning by escaping, breaking tools, staging rebellions, and more. During the American Revolution, Vermont and Massachusetts abolished slavery, while several states took steps towards gradual abolition. In 1808, federal law banned the import of enslaved African people, but it allowed the slave trade to continue domestically. Approximately 4 million people were enslaved in the U.S. when Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Lincoln opposed slavery, and though he had no plans to outlaw it, his election caused panic in southern states, which began withdrawing from the Union. They vowed to uphold slavery and formed the Confederacy, triggering the start of the American Civil War. A year into the conflict, Lincoln abolished slavery in Washington, D.C., legally freeing more than 3,000 people. And 5 months later, he announced the Emancipation Proclamation. It promised freedom to the 3.5 million people enslaved in Confederate states. But it would only be fulfilled if the rebelling states didn't rejoin the Union by January 1st, 1863. And it bore no mention of the roughly 500,000 people in bondage in the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri that hadn't seceded. When the Confederacy refused to surrender, Union soldiers began announcing emancipation. But many southern areas remained under Confederate control, making it impossible to actually implement abolition throughout the South. The war raged on for 2 more years, and on January 31st, 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment. It promised to end slavery throughout the U.S., except as punishment for a crime. But to go into effect, 27 states would have to ratify it first. Meanwhile, the Civil War virtually ended with the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee on April 9, 1865. But although slavery was technically illegal in all southern states, it still persisted in the last bastions of the Confederacy. There, enslavers like Neyland continued to evade abolition until forced. This was also the case when Union General Gordon Granger marched his troops into Galveston, Texas on June 19th and announced that all enslaved people there were officially free and had been for more than 2 years. Still, at this point, people remained legally enslaved in the border states. It wasn't until more than 5 months later, on December 6, 1865, that the 13th Amendment was finally ratified. This formally ended chattel slavery in the U.S. Because official emancipation was a staggered process, people in different places commemorated it on different dates. Those in Galveston, Texas, began celebrating Juneteenth, a combination of June and 19th, on the very first anniversary of General Granger's announcement. Over time, smaller Juneteenth gatherings gave way to large parades, and the tradition eventually became the most widespread of emancipation celebrations. But while chattel slavery had officially ended, racial inequality, oppression, and terror had not. Celebrating emancipation was itself an act of continued resistance, and it wasn't until 2021 that Juneteenth became a federal holiday. Today, Juneteenth holds profound significance as a celebration of the demise of slavery, the righteous pursuit of true freedom for all, and a continued pledge to remember the past and dream the future. People Resisted Slavery in the U.S. as Long as It Persisted uncovered the story of those who escaped slavery and created a secret society in the Great Dismal Swamp with this video. Or learn about the incredible courage of Harriet Tubman with this video.
Okay, so that's one of the best versions of a 5-minute summary of what Juneteenth means, and I just thought it was a wonderful way to kind of kick off this short segment. So the first short piece is a spoken word from Daisy Armstrong, who is, I saw in the chat, Daisy's here. So I'll play this. It's just a short spoken word inspired by the holiday and her own personal life experience.
I have a best friend named Nicholas. We call him Nick for short. And whenever I find myself in a bind, you'll see Nick by my side for sure. But for some reason, I notice police officers look at us different. His gaze towards Nick is soft, but when he stares in my direction, you can be sure that I've pissed him off. He'd screech things like, "I am the law." He locked us both up in detention. And the whole time I'm in awe because I heard Nick is over there living. I mean, we were both born in America. My ancestors forced into labor. Generations passed by, and I guess he's got family doing him favors. So finally, Nick got out. He was released on July the 4th. And every year after every year, he just celebrates and celebrates more. I used to sit back in the corner, drink a beer, and kind of pout. He'd come over like, smile, bestie, come on now, we just got out. Did he forget I sat for years later, released on June 19th? So much time after he found freedom and just grateful to have air to breathe. It's crazy when I see the fireworks and looks of admiration. Whole time I'm still working to get myself off probation. Sounds like and feels like emancipation proclamations. Slavery is over, they said, but Black people in Texas still work in plantations? Talk about patience. They were living, working, dying without payment. No taxation without representation. They declared it until they were free. But it took almost 100 years to even consider freedom for people who look like me. They cheered while we were shackled. They laughed while we were beat. And to make matters worse, they created a confederacy. Nowadays, it's a scandal for you to even take a knee. So, oh, say, can you see? Doesn't sound too sweet to me. How is it one nation under God if God looked past the we? Juneteenth, for a lot of us, it's almost a blur. Do we celebrate the Texans were freed, or do we wait until they freed the slaves up north? 3.9 million slaves, emancipation freed less than a fourth. Still you sing your songs and celebrate partial freedom, partial being the key word. Imagine a partial car, no wheels, all body going nowhere fast, a partial foot on the brake when hitting the gas, a partial pardon, being partially in love, partial happiness, or a partial answered prayer from up above. I just can't get it. My mind spins like fidgets. 10 of our first 12 presidents had slaves and still swore on Bibles for religion. Now they created pipelines from preschools to prisons, which technically is slavery if you consider the 13th Amendment. Nick hangs his head low, but I told him to hold it higher. The only way you can be an ally is if you promise not to lose your fire. He tells me, wow, bestie, I think I'm truly inspired. He now knows freedom can't just be for some of us, and the fight for Black freedom was dire.
Oh, whoops, sorry. I was on mute. I said that is spoken word if you've never experienced spoken word before. Our last moment here, I will pass over to Donna Marie. I believe she is live in the room. Donna Marie, if you'll unmute and share your thoughts with the group for a moment.
Thank you very much. If I may have the ability to share my screen, that would be awesome.
Okay, Steve can help with that.
Thank you, Steve.
You should be able to now.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. I am just honored to be part of this presentation about Juneteenth and the importance of the holiday. I'll start off by just sharing a quick story. When I was a child, Juneteenth, besides Vacation Bible School, was one of my favorite things to do every summer. And we would get together and there would be music and vendors and so many colorful things to see, wonderful foods to eat, meeting of friends and families gathering in the same places. And I grew up in Richmond, California. So I also grew up in a very multicultural area. And so I had the privilege of going to Juneteenth celebrations every summer. However, we didn't know what the celebration was all about. Just like many children, we will begin to celebrate the 4th of July and not have any connection to 1776. Many of us were celebrating Juneteenth and not having a connection to the date June 19th, 1865 and its importance. What I would like to share with you today is the symbolism of the flag and what the different items that you see there mean. Can you see my arrow rolling around? Wonderful.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So the first thing I would like to highlight is the red, white, and the blue. The red, white, and blue is the symbolism that connects us to the actual American flag, as well as the declaration that all formerly enslaved and their descendants would be considered Americans. So that was a big difference between how we were perceived as free, but still not considered citizens or Americans, so much so as some of our lighter hued counterparts. Then we have the white star in the middle, which is a symbolization of the Lone Star, which is the representation of Texas, Galveston, Texas, where the last announcement that we knew of had gone out. Again, history has not shared this information with us throughout the years. And so many of us thought that June 19th, 1865 was actually the last date. But again, like the video showed, there were people who were enslaved in border states still until 5 months later. And an aside is in 1808, when transatlantic slavery was abolished, there was still illegal slavery coming up through Louisiana ports as well as Galveston, Texas. So that's just an aside. A lot of people don't know that. The star around it that's considered a starburst, that is a representation of new beginnings, a nova, something that we were excited to look forward to. We were free and we finally knew about it. Then you have the arc that goes across, and that symbolizes the horizon, a new horizon, as well as new opportunities for Black people who were formerly enslaved. The blue is a representation as well of the new horizon, and the red, just like the American flag, symbolizing the ground soaked with blood for those enslaved Africans specifically, and for all who fought on the side of anti-slavery in general. That was a representation of the blood-soaked ground that brought about our freedoms. Lastly, this particular flag was designed in 1997, revised in 2000, as well as adopted in 2000. But in 2007, they decided to add on the date, June 19th, 1865, in order to make it officially connect to when General Granger came in to Galveston, Texas to announce that slavery had been abolished. Thank you, and back to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate all the presentations on this topic today. I will say, if you don't know much about Juneteenth or never been to an event, I want to welcome anyone the opportunity to just Google Juneteenth events near me. I've created a couple hashtags. Rise Consultants and Mid-America are both on Instagram. I encourage you to go out later this afternoon to be a part of the festivities in your own community. Take pictures, use the hashtags, and tag us. And what I will do is I will draw a raffle from all of the folks who do that. The beautiful thing about technology, I can just search for anyone who's done, for instance, the Equity in Action tag. I'll do a raffle amongst those folks for the Prevention Specialist Exam Study Guide. So if anyone's wanting to become certified as a prevention specialist, this is an opportunity to get that guide. So thank you all for allowing this time and opportunity in this space to have this brief conversation around equity, and specifically Juneteenth as the day that we are gathered here today. So to continue with our conversation, I want to first just take a moment to center us in what we're going to be talking about for the last bit of our time together. So I'm going to ask that everyone grab a piece of paper, and on your piece of paper, create a quadrant like this, just where you're going to have 4 boxes on your piece of paper, okay? And what we're going to do first is to take just a moment. I'm only going to put 30 seconds on the timer here. to take just a few moments, and right there where the crosses here, I'm going to have you all just draw the tightest little spiral right there in the middle for just 30 seconds of time. And the purpose and intention of this is to just center us into this conversation, give us a moment to take a deep breath as we enter into the training content for today. So just the tightest little circle there. Make sure you are breathing. You might be surprised that you hold your breath. Okay. So the first question I want you to think about, and you're going to write this answer in the top right corner, the top left corner of your page. When you think of health equity, what comes to mind? When you think of health equity, what comes to mind? Just 30 seconds, the first things that come to your mind. Our second question in the top right corner, what fears do you have about prioritizing equity? What fears do you have about prioritizing equity? Okay, our third question in the bottom left corner of your paper. What do you think is our biggest potential for change? What do you think is our biggest potential for change? Hey, and then the last question, you should only have one box left if I did my math right. All right, see, I got some people smiling. People can take a joke. What are you hoping to learn from the workshop? Why did you decide to come? That's what I'm interested in. What are you hoping to learn from this workshop? And really, I'm thinking the whole series, because today's just day one. All right. Okay. So I have 3 things I hope we can accomplish. And like I said, my hope is that you all don't just come today, that you'll come throughout the entire week, because ideally our conversations will build upon each other. Today, we're really just going to lay the foundation, making sure we all have a clear understanding of the difference between equity and equality. And we'll talk about the foundational terms that really help us understand what health equity is. I think understanding the foundation is critical to really applying your knowledge to practice. And so on the tail end, we'll have a little bit of time to kind of think critically around how do you even take what you've learned and talked about today to apply to your practice in prevention. You all do have Mentimeter, so you can follow along with me. Of course, you can see it. Mentimeter does allow you to put comments on slides and things like that too. So feel free to use the chat along the way. If I say anything that resonates with you, something that you like, feel free to communicate in the chat. Usually conversations like this are very communicative. So the first thing is, what is this difference between equity and equality? This particular graphic comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which they have actually updated. They have an even newer version of this. I personally really like this graphic because I think it helps us think critically about the difference between the two words. And I first want to draw your attention to equality, which is this concept that we create this resource and we indiscriminately pass it to everyone. One of the challenges with doing this is that what you create, the resource you create, isn't tailored to the community you're serving. And I think that is beautifully shown by the graphic here. If you look at the 4 individuals in the graphic, there's really only one person who's able to pick up the resource that's created and use it efficiently. The other 3 individuals are struggling, even to the point there's one person who can't even use the resource. It's not even helpful to them. And this is the concept of what equality says. It doesn't give any consciousness to the conditions, to special characteristics of people at all, which is why we want to stay away from this concept of equality, of just giving everyone the same resources. The graphic below here looks at what it means to really think about things from an equity perspective. And I love this visual here. One of the things I think is challenging why we struggle with doing equity is because if you look at that, these now represent 4 individual resources that had to be created in order to meet the needs of the community, right? That means more funding often, it means more people power often. But if we're truly going to be responsive to the disparities that communities are experiencing, you've got to customize your resource. And so for me, this is one of the best graphics I have seen for truly understanding the difference. I know a lot of you have seen the graphic with the fence and the boxes, right? And the people on the boxes. Some take away the fence, all these versions. For me, this one really hits home for when I think about prevention and prevention programming and why it's important, even if we have an evidence-based strategy, that it has to be tailored. It has to be customized. We really have to think about the conditions in which a community is living, breathing, eating, and playing, worshiping, so that we create resources that actually take into account the characteristics of a particular community. So this is a graphic I'm a huge fan of. I think it says a lot in a really short amount of time. I want to share just a short little video clip here for you. This is from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. And I encourage you all to Google them. They have really put a lot of energy. They have a prevention specific department within their organization. And they make these really great 1 to 2 minute animation videos that I think are very profound. So I want to share this one with you all that I think also hits home to what exactly we need to think about when we're considering equity versus equality.
I've come to think that most people believe that everyone deserves the same opportunity to achieve good health. That we should all have what's necessary to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. That we should all be given boots that fit. And that's when I learned the difference between equality and equity. See, one ensures everybody gets the same thing, while the other ensures everybody gets the something they need. Take 3 neighborhoods. Each one is situated across from the grocery store. One has no transportation system, and the streets aren't safe at night. One needs a boat to get there, and one is positioned a block away. Equality says, we hand them all boots and tell them to make do. One-size-fits-all solutions for problems that require more than one resolution. But equity, the quality of being fair and impartial, speaks to access. Equity speaks to safety. Equity speaks to transportation. Equity speaks to understanding. Equity speaks to the actual human condition.
Okay, so that, like I said, is just such a powerful video, conveys so much in just a few minutes. But again, I think about our programming, you all, I think about prevention and our goals and our purposes, and to what degree are we considering equity in the work we do? How are we really thinking about the conditions, looking at our communities, doing the proper asset mapping, environmental scans to really look at what are the other issues that are happening in a community besides just providing prevention education. And that's my hope, that throughout our time together, we can really begin to think differently about how we show up to truly address the disparities and health equities that are happening in the communities that we're serving. So moving right along, let's look at some language and terminology here. There are 4 key terms that we're going to think about today. And the first being disparity. Now, this is a term that I have heard for a long time. My background's in public health. And so disparities are things that you're taught, especially when you take any data courses. And I'm sure the word disparity is something that's familiar to everyone here in the room. What I want to really point out to you all is the word preventable. For me, preventable had never really been a part of how disparities were explained. Often, when I saw disparity data, it was more presented as a characterization of a group of people, right? This is how these folks are. They're more likely to be ill. They're more likely to do this or to do that. Not that the difference was preventable. And what's interesting is when you really dig into what disparities are, these are differences in health outcomes that are based on the list of things that are listed here, which are things that should not create differences in health outcomes. That's the biggest deal. So as a result of me having this new way of thinking about disparities, now when I see disparities, whether it's any of these categories here, I first say, what is the other thing happening that's creating this health difference outcome? Versus trying to look at what's wrong with the people that the data is about. And this has been a shift for me because it wasn't how I was taught disparity data as a grad student. It really wasn't. And what has been interesting is as I learned more words, which the second word is inequity, that's what really got me thinking. When you see a disparity, you want to be looking at what is the inequity that's creating the disparity. Okay. And inequity is when there's unequal access to the fundamentals, okay, which is going to connect into our next term, because inequity looks at unequal access to education, healthcare, transportation, housing, and resources, you all. And for anyone who knows, these are essentially the social determinants of health, right? Which is the third term we're going to talk about here in a minute. And so what has been profound for me is to really understand that inequities are the root that creates disparities. And so whenever you're looking at your data that's happening in your communities and you're noticing those differences, look a little deeper. Ask yourself, is there inequity? Is there an access challenge? Does the community struggle with getting access to healthcare, whether that's recovery services or treatment services or prevention services, right? Are there challenges around the education system in the community you serve? All of these things are going to help perpetuate the disparities. And until we start looking at the inequities, you all, we're not going to really make change on the disparity data and how it shows up in communities. What's interesting as I kind of do more reflection for myself is thinking about the root of inequities. and what causes those, right? And that's an even deeper conversation, some connected to our history. I think some even connected to this day, Juneteenth, that we're here for, right? And thinking about the history of inequality that's been a part of American society. So I think these terms are really important to think about and consider. So as I mentioned, the third term is social determinants of health. And these social determinants of health, it's actually not a new term. It was first introduced back in 2020 with the Healthy People 2020 goals, where there was this recognition that there are 5 domains of life that really either impact your health in a positive way or impact your health in a negative way. And I'll show you what those 5 domains are. And what I encourage you to do is just take a moment for yourself. Think about, for you as an individual, how these 5 domains are showing up in your life. What are the ways that your social determinants help you be healthy, help you be well, help you get the most of your life? And really consider that for a moment. And what I encourage you to do is, after you think about that, to take a moment and think about the communities that you're serving. What do their social determinants look like? And I truly believe, you all, in prevention, if we're going to make the impact and the changes that we want to make, we're going to have to start really thinking about these 5 domains, the level of inequality that exists for some communities across the 5 domains, and the subsequent disparities that exist when we don't address those inequalities. This is our framework of how we're thinking. The reason I call the series Equity in Action, because I do believe we've been talking about disparities, social terms of health. These are not new terms. I would be surprised if anyone is like, oh my God, this is the first time I've heard this today. But yet we're still talking. So my goal, my challenge with this particular series is, how do we take the critical thinking and place it into action and really consider the ways in which we change how we do our work, how we execute our prevention strategies. So the last set of terms I want to share with you represent a conglomerate of terms called structural inequities. And this is a framework of thinking about how inequities even happen, okay? Right? Because inequities don't come from nowhere, they get created. So there's 3 terms that I want to kind of talk about in understanding the machine of structural inequities and the gears that turn it and keep perpetuating and pushing out inequality. The first is the system. And systems are how we organize society, you all. We have an education system, we have a healthcare system, okay? We have a justice system, right? We have all these systems in place, and just about every single one of us here, if you're working any sort of job, work within a system. And systems are how we organize our society. And they dictate rules, how we live, those sorts of things. So our systems are really important to evaluate and to think about how they were built and structured. Unfortunately, we have some systems, you all, that were built on inequality. They were developed out of it. They were developed in a way that excluded people intentionally. Okay. And so a part of this is, wow, we have to take a critical look at the systems that are working and moving and operating in the work that we do, even in prevention in the communities that we're serving. What I'll say is that, you know, when we think about prevention and substance use disorders specifically, the criminal justice system has been a huge player in the world related to substance use disorder prevention, unfortunately. We've had a long history as a society of criminalizing SUD. And that is changing. I think we've got to push the envelope more around changing that because as a health condition, it should not be treated as a criminal affair. But unfortunately, it has been for a long time. So we live in a world and society that has systems that organizes what we do and how we do things. And a part of this work is taking a look at our systems and seeing what are the inequities that are baked into that system. Then there's a concept of structures. The structures are the institutions, the agencies that are established in order to carry out the will of the system. So for instance, we have an education system. The agencies and institutions a part of the education system are our school boards, right? Our schools. We have a healthcare system. As a part of that system, the structures are our doctor's office, our hospitals, okay? And we want to be thinking about the fact that there are systems and structures and these things work together, okay? Many of us are employed in the structures that are a part of a system, okay? And I think sometimes when we think about health equity and inequality, the biggest challenge is the system feels so big that it's like, what can I do? What is my role? And that's what I want to have staying in the back of your mind this whole week is what is my role as an employee, as a person who works within a structure and the structure that's inside of a system. Because what I believe, you all, the third term is society, which is us. We, people, we make up society. We are the folks who work inside of the structures. So as much as we complain about the things that were created, we created them, you all. Us, people, society. So I always like to think about this last term because for me, it gives me hope, right? Because if we created it, we can restructure it, right? We have the power, we have the ability to think differently and to disrupt the system that has been pushing out inequities for far too long. So my hope is that a part of the definitions and understanding the words and how these line up and interact with each other, that in it we can have a space and a sense of hope that things can change. And they will. And guess what? They already are and have. Because that is evident by everything that we're doing here today. You know, I am always in amazing awe at where we have come. You know, myself, I was raised by a woman who was born in 1929. And I can't even for my life imagine what it was like to live in the US in 1929, you all, for so many reasons. I mean, I'd miss my technology, I'd miss my internet, all these other luxuries that we have, right? Because of the advancements in human technology, but also because the advancements in us as people to recognize the error of our past and to do something different. And that's what truly inspires me for the hope for the future. So I want to begin to open it up for a little bit of a conversation here. The first one here through Minty. And feel free, let's see, I'll show the Minty Code here for folks. To just think about for a minute, what are some of the structures or systems that are impacting health outcomes in your community? And we can do this a couple ways. If folks want to put something in the chat, you can. If you want to drop it in Minty, you can. We've got a little time, so I'm also welcome to anyone who wants to use their voice. You could do a hand raise so we know you want to chat. And feel free to come off of mute to talk to me and talk to the group. Great, we got some folks using Minty. Got some folks. Okay, so transportation, education, the tax-based system, right? Right, because that impacts the economics in a community, which impacts the resources for a school. Great, thank you. These are some wonderful examples of systems that are operating in the communities we serve that truly impact folks' access to all sorts of things, you know, and then it's like a domino effect. Okay, thank you. Looks like people are understanding Mentimeter. I appreciate that. stuff is coming in here. Child welfare, access to culturally appropriate healthcare. That's a big one. That is a big one. Housing. High cost of education. And, sometimes I think about how education then gets connected to job opportunities. You know what I mean? It's like you stifle the ability for folks to get good education. It has a domino impact for the remainder of their life. Some folks are saying health insurance, mental and behavioral health care, access to substance treatment. Great. Thank you all for these suggestions of some of the systems or structures that are impacting health in the communities you serve. Ooh, school disciplinary practices. Great. Great. Thank you all. These are very thoughtful responses here. So before we've got about 10 minutes left here. I have a couple more mentees that I want to share with you all here as we begin to think about, we've had just a brief conversation today, but I still want us to leave thinking about what, first, what are you thinking and feeling right now? And this will just populate some thoughts here, but I also want to, after this Minty, just begin people to share, what do you think you could do with what we've even talked about today, what you've learned today, what you've heard today, and to get folks' thoughts there. And I know it takes a little bit of time to type in with your thumb, so I'll give you all a moment. Ooh, thank you for saying that. Overwhelmed, right? Where do you even start? Okay, yes. So I will share you all this. The digital workbook you received has live links. So the only videos that weren't in there are the Juneteenth videos. So I'll be sure to get those to you all also. But the other video is embedded in your guide already. Great. I know the videos were amazing. I know, right? It's always nice when you find a great video that can really capture a complex thoughts in a short amount of time. Ooh. I am concerned with changes some are trying to make to our system and structures that are already unequal. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all. Wow. Okay, one last question for y'all to type. And again, I always say, feel free to unmute too. I'm okay to hear another voice in the room. But before we close up today, I would love to just hear and see, even just from today, what do you believe you could do with even this information so far that we've talked about today? Yes, pass it on, pass it on. Wonderful. Ooh, I love that. I think I need to learn more so I can develop programming. Thank you, those who are also commenting in the chat. I appreciate that. This is great. Wonderful. Oh, yeah, share the video with children. That's wonderful. Awesome. Wow. Awesome. Thank you guys for this, for just your engagement, for being here, for being attentive, and for really kind of thinking critically. I mean, we barely even scratched the surface in our hour together, right? So much more that we'll be talking about. I really hope that you all will come back tomorrow, play the video with Congress. I love it. Yes. Yes, definitely. They need a lot of education, y'all, for sure. They really do. They really do. Okay, so as we come to a close here, what I do also just want to remind folks is please take an opportunity, if you have not or ever done so before, take an opportunity to find out what's happening in your community today on June 19th. I want to encourage folks to take pictures, to be engaged, to learn more, and to get out and support events that are happening in your community.